me how that happened.
My girlfriend and I were in here playing pool. She said I need my cigarettes. I came out to get cigarettes out of the truck. When I walked out, I saw his legs and everything laying there.
Okay.
And I thought, somebody got drunk, had too much. I'm gonna get cigarettes. And I thought about it. I thought, you know what? I'm not even messing with it. I'm just gonna go inside and tell the bar, hey, you need to go out here and deal with this. And I heard him say help.
Okay.
I came back around this side. I walked up on him. I saw the puddle. I thought it was vomit. I walked over there. When I got there, I realized it was blood. He said, help, help, I've been shot.
Officers were dispatched to a liquor store parking lot that's connected to several businesses for an individual that had potentially been shot and was in critical condition.
What can I help you with?
But upon the officer's initial arrival, a victim was found lying there in a pool of blood and appeared to be in a very critical state. Other than that, we really didn't know what we had besides the shooting.
Where did I get shot? We don't know yet. We're still looking, guys. Hey, you bleeding on the bottom there?
Just hang in there, brother.
Fortunately, he was breathing and he was able to speak with us. He actually said his name was Steve.
Oh, when the...
Are you having any trouble breathing, partner?
Every 5 minutes,
Okay. What I want you to do is just slowly keep taking your breaths in and out. You know how long you've been sitting out here?
You guys have paid.
Right in the back of my car, it's unlocked. Back of this car, it's unlocked.
So even though Steve was in a critical condition, we need to get as much information as possible because right now all we know is we have Steve there, they've shot. We don't have any other eyewitnesses. We don't have any suspect on scene. So we need to get him to the hospital.
Don't know the name? He says he's an older black male in a tan
Have you ever
jacket.
seen him before?
No.
Never seen him before? Was he here at the bar tonight? He just walked up on you?
Information was gathered from the victim on the scene that the possible shooter was an older black male with a tan jacket. And that's really, at this point, all we knew about the actual suspect.
Were you at the bar tonight?
No.
Okay, how old are you? Hey, Lonnie.
Yeah.
Grab his wallet out of his back pocket. Hey, where do you live?
I'm taking your wallet out, so don't move, okay?
During the process of officers talking with Steve while he was laying on the ground, paramedics arrived.
San Juan AMR 2136. Single DSW, lost a lot of blood. Yeah, DSW, lost a lot of blood.
Where at?
Right here.
No, I mean, like, where's my shot?
I don't know. Some in the arm, I think.
I don't know about that. All right, I'm gonna grab my car.
This is absolutely a stressful situation because it's a chaotic scene because it's happening out in real time. I mean, he may succumb to his injuries while we're there, but really officers are just doing what they're trained to do. You really don't have much time to think about it. You really don't have much time to process it. You just have to go and do your job and get as much information as possible.
Why don't you pull him back if you don't mind? And let's get his information while he's here. Okay.
Yep.
And get
Someone get his information.
I'll get his info.
Yeah.
Hastings, I got your flashlight.
I don't want to do that.
That's fine. No exit window.
I don't know.
It looks like he's bleeding a lot out through the mouth,
Okay.
so it might have gone through the neck to his mouth.
I'm gonna
Give me that flashlight.
call him.
Here. Need flashlight.
Guys, get out some, he's going in the shop.
Okay.
The most important priority is human life. So once the paramedics get there, then it really changes quickly to where they're prepping this person to transport to the ER.
Okay. Partner, you just still sit still, okay? That's an entry one there. There's your ground that came through right there.
Okay.
We don't have an exit as far as I can tell until we turn him over.
All right.
And we can look at the bottom. Here, are you still with us, guy? There's nothing.
Okay.
There's nothing.
Looks fine.
Yeah. Partner, all we're doing is rolling.
lights.
Don't you move.
I got lights.
Let us do it. Still. No, I know.
got you,
I know.
bud.
I
We
got
got
you.
you.
Don't move. Put your arm down to your side. Thank you.
Put them on your waist, bub. Grab a hold of your belt. There you go, just like that.
Enough pressure.
Are you able to breathe?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna roll him on a board. Father's coming on the board.
Okay. Keep breathing. Relax. Okay.
Do you want a board or no?
Steve was in a critical condition. We don't really know the extent of his injury. We just know there's a lot of blood loss. We don't know if he's going to succumb to his injuries.
Hey,
Are you with me, bud? Are you with me?
relax and open your eyes.
Turn you.
Relax, relax, relax. It's going to be a little bumpy just for a moment.
I've already called St. Mary's, told them they're gonna be on your
A little
way.
bumpy just for a
Hang
moment.
on, this one's underneath.
We're getting
this
you on a
one.
board. They're going to be
All right,
underneath.
1, 2, 3.
Slow down, guys.
Steve indicated that his father's car had been stolen during the crime. And he said his cell phone is also missing and was in the car.
Now we're working on information. Red Sonata. It's supposed to be this guy's dad's car. We'll work on getting the registration for it.
At that point, we need to know, okay, who is his father? You know, what's his father's name? If we can get this person's name, we can get the information on the vehicle and put out a BOL, otherwise known as a be on the lookout for this vehicle and find the shooter.
Open your eyes. What kind of vehicle? What kind of vehicle? Red Sonata. What year? Do you know?
He's got his, he's got the license, someone's got the license.
You're fine.
We're
partner.
fine.
Just keep breathing. Help your mouth. Breathe. Keep working
This
through
is
it,
a
okay?
shooting, and the guy stole his car, BOL for a red Honda Sonata. At this time, I do not have a year for the vehicle itself.
Let's get his dad's information. We can get a
my
plate.
flashlight
I
now.
got it. I got it. Do what? Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Steve, what's your dad's name?
Come back. Okay, go up now. Go up.
You're good. Go up. There you go.
Ryder.
I will take one, yes.
Hey, if you guys can get his dad's name at all, if you can't, I understand, but that way we can get a plate number for the vehicle. That
His dad's.
his dad's name.
What's your dad's name? Scott.
So Steve is transported to the hospital. There's a little bit of sense of the scene has calmed down a little bit because now we have this person. He's going to get the care that he needs.
This property right here?
Yes,
Is there a way to access these cameras that we'd be able to see?
yes it is.
Okay.
Part of the investigation, especially in this day and age, is getting video footage. Luckily, where this occurred at, this is a major intersection. So we want to look at the parking lot video right away to see if there's anything there.
So at this point, crime scene technicians gather the video surveillance, download it, and then ultimately we take it back to headquarters where it is reviewed by detectives. The parking lot footage showed the red vehicle that Steve was driving coming into the picture, into the parking lot. A few moments later, what appeared to be an older black male with a tan jacket walking into the view of the surveillance on the parking lot. That was the exact description that was given us by Steve. And then even a few minutes later, you can see the red car taking off again out of the parking lot. So this was some very important information. We assume at this point that this was the guy. This was the shooter that was described by Steve. So this becomes the priority to figure out who this person was. We know we have to find this guy.
With the information that Steve had told us, the description of the shooter, combined with the video that closely matched what the victim had told us, we believed that we had the suspect in that video.
So the next day, we had real great news that Steve has survived.
This is a critical injury that I believe most people don't survive. Fortunately, he did, which was incredibly good, but you have to still work it with an utmost sense of urgency.
But at this point, detectives still did not know the identity of the person. So we realized, you know what, we need to go speak with Steve again at the hospital to try to get more information from him. So detectives went back to the ER to try to gather more intel from Steve on maybe this shooter's name or any more information he could give us.
At this point, things start changing. Steve starts telling us the full story. He started to be honest with the detectives and admitted that what had happened was that this is a drug deal that went bad.
So I'm gonna tell you basically that night, okay? You told us that you went there to sell this guy dope, marijuana.
Yes.
Okay. Who set up this meeting?
Jaleel.
Okay, Jaleel. Did you guys meet up at Walmart at that time?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Steve tells detectives that the drug deal was actually set up with an acquaintance of his, Jaleel, that he has sold marijuana to before. And this Jaleel, during this conversation, asked him, hey, I have another guy that would like to buy weed from you. He says his name was Jeremiah.
When did he say anything about Jeremiah? What was the context of that conversation?
He said, I have a buddy that needs some, so I said, yeah, it was okay. And then Jaleel said that he sent to my number. I was like, okay, that's fine.
So Steve actually believed he was going to be meeting Jaleel's friend there, Jeremiah, to sell him marijuana.
Did you see him when you pulled in, or was...
I texted him saying here, he said, okay, be there in 2 minutes. I said, okay.
Was the car locked?
It was locked until I saw it at the last second. I just locked it real quick.
Okay. All right, so is he completely in the car, or is his feet still outside, or do you know?
His feet were still kind of outside the car, like...
Are you turned around looking at him, or are you looking in the rear view?
Well, I did for a second, I saw me going, I just I kind of looked forward and just froze for a second, and then just like a second or two later I heard a gunshot, and then I heard another gunshot, and I felt my body just, I don't know, like almost levitate off the ground or something, I don't know. I knew I had been shot. I didn't remember like anything after that.
He actually informed them that there had been another person in the vehicle named Christopher Hoffling, who'd been his friend, and he possibly had been shot. At that point, everything just changed.
I didn't know if Chris got shot by the first shot or if he just shot off into the air or what happened. But like, I know I got shot, and that's all I could like focus on.
That really, really changed the course of this investigation. We may have another victim who may be deceased or seriously injured as well.
Okay. Do you remember what happened then?
I got shot. I laid there for a second until I couldn't move, and then I felt my head slam on the concrete.
When you say you lay there, are you talking about in the car?
Yeah, I was just sitting in the car.
Okay. And then you felt your head hit the concrete.
Yeah, I felt my whole body and had slammed into the concrete.
Do you remember if you opened the door?
No, he drugged me out.
Okay. Was he saying anything at that point, or do you recall?
I don't remember hearing anything at all.
Okay.
I just remember hearing a loud bang, and that was about it.
Do you remember the car driving off?
Yeah, because I hit the ground, and there's no reason for me to just be pulled out of the car unless he's stealing it. That I was right next to the car, so I laid there. I could move. My head would move. My arms would move. And finally, I don't know how I moved my head, but I turned and see Chris was there, and he was gone too. So the car and Chris was gone.
The case goes on super ramped up, high alert now. We're looking for another victim. Steve was able to tell us that he thought that maybe his buddy Christopher was shot. So we got to find this car. That's the bottom line. We got to find it immediately. because we know there's a second person involved.
Christopher was kind of a little bit of everything. He started out really shy, and then once he came out of his shell, I mean, he was fun, he was silly. Me and Christopher participated in MMA classes. He really enjoyed MMA. I think that was like a passion that he had, and he was very motivated in class. I think we had about 10 years difference in our ages, but I am very outgoing, and I think he really liked that. So it kind of brought the fun, outgoing side of him, so we could goof off in class together. Christopher is such a fun, loving, goofy kid that honestly, I would have never thought that this would have happened to Christopher. I didn't believe it. Just the whole scenario didn't make sense to me because that's not the Christopher that I knew.
Steve didn't know which one of these two suspects, Jaleel or Jeremiah, were the actual shooter. But during this time, the priority, of course, is trying to find Chris Haefling.
There is a huge urgency to find Chris. All law enforcement's going to be notified of the description of the vehicle that's stolen, and we may have our potential other victim there. So we need all that information out as soon as we can, which can be crucial in finding the vehicle.
But we don't know where Christopher's at. We really don't even know how to get in contact with him. So our natural progression in this case was to contact a family member. We were able to get a hold of his father. Detectives and officers went to his father's house, hoping to try to find out how to make contact with Christopher.
Mr. Haefling, is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Is it okay if I step in, sir?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I need you to go to the other room, please. I apologize. Thank you.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just get where I sleep. I work out of St. Mary's. I might even seen you out there.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you got?
Are you related to Chris?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, who's your relationship?
Son.
Okay. Do you know, is he here?
Chris is not here. He drives a red truck. He's not here.
Okay. Does he stay here with you on a regular basis?
He comes and goes. He's got a friend at the apartment. Why has he done something?
Well, we don't know.
Okay.
There's another gentleman that's been shot, and all they can get out of him is that Chris was possibly with him, and that he possibly was shot. So we're trying to locate him to find out if he has been or not. Do you know how to?
I can call a cell phone. If you want to do that?
Yes, please. You know, you said he goes to a friend's house? Yeah. May I come with you, sir?
When you go talk to a family member of a potential victim, and we don't know the status of Christopher at that time, it's a delicate balance of what you can and can't tell the family members. We don't want to raise the dad up to believe that his son is seriously hurt, even though he might be at that time. So we're going to be very straightforward with the family, because we need to be straightforward answers back from the family.
If you can call Chris, that'd be wonderful. Just ask him where he's at and if he's okay. Fine, man.
Okay. Okay.
How you doing?
I've never had anything. I would be really shocked myself, if he was in something. I'd be.
Please leave your message for.
Hang up right now. Okay. I'm Matt Taylor. Okay. If he calls,
okay,
gets in touch with you, just like I said, the other person that was shot said that he thought that your son Chris had been shot also. So.
You didn't? Oh, Chris didn't do it.
No, sir. No, we think Chris may have.
Oh, he might have been. He might have been on the receiving end too.
Yes, sir.
I mean, he's a good kid, so
Okay. Well, like I said, we're just going off limited information. So.
Well, I appreciate it. So then I would, if I hear anything, I will let you.
Just call 911. The officer Matt Taylor came by.
So as more time goes on, detectives and officers are thinking there's less of a chance that we're actually going to find Christopher alive. So we really have to get moving as quick as we can, because if we don't find this guy, he's probably not going to survive. So detectives, while they're continuing this investigation, now that we know what had happened and we got a picture of it, we want to access Steve's phone records because we don't even know where Steve's phone is. It seems like it's possibly in the stolen car, and also will give us information on what transpired, was communicated. So Steve was a little bit hesitant initially with detectives to let them go through his phone records, but he further started cooperating more. Then at that time, detectives went ahead and got a search warrant for those phone records to go ahead and get that processed.
One of the things the phone records showed us was the last location known of Steve's phone, and that was in the area of Washington and Lombard Avenues. We're residential area, not a whole lot goes on there. It's within about 5 minutes of where the shooting happened. So we concentrated on that area that next morning, believing that we're going to find the vehicle somewhere close.
So officers started looking, and lo and behold, they found the vehicle there parked in the garage, the red Sonata, and inside there we found the victim, Christopher, lying in the passenger seat, slumped over at that time. He'd been shot about 4 times, and he was deceased. So everything again changed in this case now, because not only before we had an attempted murder, we had a stolen vehicle, now we had actual homicide that's happened.
I found it out on the news. At first it was a story where they weren't saying really any names, so I didn't know who it was. But later it came out, and I was shocked. It was a lot of anger, a lot of questions. I couldn't understand why anybody would do that to him, because he was amazing. For what I knew of him, he was amazing. And for anybody to take somebody's life in that way was wrong. Honestly, it's still unbelievable. It's almost surreal. It doesn't feel like reality. You know, you feel like, oh, I'm still gonna run into him again. You know, I'm gonna see him at the mall and he's gonna be like, hey, Bridget, what's up? You know, you don't wanna believe it. Christopher was young. He had his whole life ahead of him, and somebody just took that from him, his whole life.
At this stage, we get information that Steve is going to survive his injury. And now we had his phone records back, which was an incredibly good piece of evidence.
Steve's cell phone records ended up being very influential, very important in this case. We were able to confirm the information that he said. He was communicating by text between him and Jalil about the drug deal and selling the weed to this Jeremiah. We also were able to learn through these records that Jalil's real name is Jalil Fellows. Jeremiah, that was supposed to be buying the weed from Steve, that was an alias, and that his real name was Earl Martin. When checking the real name of Earl Martin, we discover that he is on parole, and he's got an arrest record and a history of a previous robbery, which kind of heightens the detectives on his involvement, because this would fall into line of what happened this evening. So at this point, we have 2 victims. We have a murder, attempted murder, a robbery. We have 2 suspects, Jalil Fellows, and we have Earl Martin, which used the alias of Jeremiah. But we don't know who's the possible shooter. So now it becomes a priority for detectives, investigators, to put out a BOL, be on the lookout for these 2 suspects.
Earl Martin, he had a lengthy history. He had been through the system several times. He is on probation. He's required to report his address or where he's living. So we knew where he was at.
He's located at his home. He agrees to come to headquarters to be interviewed.
Hey, I'm Dave with Police Department, okay? I'm the detective. I'm sorry. I understand. A lot of times the guys that bring you in here, they don't know what's going on, man. They're just told to bring somebody in. I don't know, you know. I understand you're probably frustrated. I don't know how long you've been sitting around.
Yeah, for a while.
Okay, all right. Well, can I do anything to make you more comfortable? You good?
Just tell me what I'm charged with.
Okay. Well, you're in a locked facility here talking to me, okay? So I gotta read you Miranda warnings, okay?
Yep.
You understand that? You
Yep.
understand, right? You wanna talk to me?
I just want to know what I'm being charged with.
Okay. You wanna talk to me then?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Man, I'm here to talk to you about some stuff that happened last night. Okay? You want to tell me where you were last night?
Well, you want to tell me if I've already, am I being charged with anything?
I can't tell you one way or the other right now. That's why we're talking. Okay?
I think you would know. I mean, you're a detective. You've been doing this for a while. You know I've been in the system.
I know you're, man, listen, I know you're not dumb. I seen that you have, you know, a prior for strong arm and stuff like that, so I'm not trying to play you for a fool. I know you know how the game works.
Okay, so I'll be in charge, in other words.
That's why we're here talking. That's why I want to talk to you.
All right, well then I'll
listen.
Better.
The bottom line is this: last night, some stuff happened. Okay, and it didn't happen in the best spot. There's cameras everywhere. There's a lot of moving parts. Okay, and that's how I literally would come knocking on your door today. All right, I've been working on this all night. There's a lot of stuff going on. I would like to have your side of the story. You know what I'm saying? Because there literally is two sides to every story. But you have to be willing to tell me your side of the story for me to hear it.
Yeah, I think if I'm being charged with something, I better have an attorney. I just think that's for the best. I don't really exactly know what you're talking about, so go ahead and charge me and I'll figure it out when I go to court.
Okay. So time when we talk with you, okay?
All right.
So at the end of the day, detectives, we all doing this job, we understand that suspects are going to lawyer up. It's their right. And even though it's frustrating, disappointing, you got to move on and you got to keep working your case.
So at the same time, we put out the bolo and it's made it across social media, it's made it across news networks. They've also reported on the fact at this point the vehicle's been found, there's been a homicide. So Jalil knows that the police are looking for him. And what he actually does is his mom brings him downtown to talk to detectives. So he actually came on his own accord, wanted to speak with detectives and kind of headed off a little bit.
Dave Smith, man, from the police department. I'm a detective, okay, bud? Glad you came down here, man, I really am. Speaks a lot about you. Got your mom with you? Yeah, gotcha. I respect the fact and I appreciate the fact you came down here on your own. It says a lot.
We definitely want to get Jalil's side of the story. We haven't spoke with him. We want to see what he has to say. We already had the text messages from Steve's phone, so we knew a little more information, of course, than he knew that we had. And so maybe Jalil's the guy who's going to be able to put all these pieces together for us.
I imagine this is an emotional time, man. You know what I'm saying? But I think we're getting off on the right foot because you came to see me. And I'm glad you did. It's like I said, at this point, it speaks pretty highly of you. Do you know why you're here? So. Okay. Tell me about it.
I've seen that you guys found a car or something in the river on the news. Well, I didn't see it, but my mom was telling me about it today, so I kind of think it has something to do with that.
Okay.
Jalil starts talking and said he actually knows Steve. He's the one who's made contact with him. He's bought marijuana from him before. So what he does, he go ahead and gives him this information so that Earl can contact Steve and that they can have this basically meet up for this drug deal. So he goes that far, but he says he doesn't know anything about the homicide.
I heard, I've read that little report on the internet and then I was like, it just threw me for a loop.
I'm sure it was a gut wrencher, man. Yeah. Is that why Is that why you and your mama?
Yeah, we're
get
just, yes. And, like, I don't even know what to say.
Did you know that Earl's capable of something like this?
I mean, I really didn't know Earl. I mean, that's what, I really didn't know him. I mean, I've talked to him at work. I mean, kid around, but nothing about no robberies or nothing like that.
Just know this, Jalil, that honesty at this point is important, man. It's valuable.
I know.
You know what I mean? Honesty is valuable. I had no reason to believe that you're a horrible person. Okay, and then you confirm, listen, my job is to read people, you know what I'm saying? And then I meet you in the context that I did, which is gonna look good on you, you know what I'm saying, which is good. And you're being honest with me thus far, you know what I mean, which is awesome. You're basically showing your character, and I respect the shit out of that, man.
Well, when we spoke with Jalil, it was already a little suspicious. We're starting to kind of indicate that he probably was in on this robbery. It becomes apparent just by his body language. He's very fidgety at first. His legs are moving. He's probably involved more than what he's telling us.
I got all the text messages, man. Okay, and that stuff. At this point, man, I just gotta wonder, like, did you know this robbery was gonna turn out to be murder? You know what I'm saying? Did you know?
I didn't know it was going to be a murder. I didn't know.
I like to think that.
I really didn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
So the robbery, let me just say this. Earl, okay, he hits these 2 punks for dope. He takes their weed. That's a small drop in the bucket to murder. I mean, how do we jump from hitting these two kids for their weed to murder, man? You know what I'm saying?
I don't.
You did, so you did not know about the murder?
I don't know about I didn't know. I seen it on the news like everybody else.
Did you think he was legitimately going to just hit these kids?
I didn't know.
And steal their dope?
I don't know what he was going to do. I don't know.
I'm not.
Do I need a lawyer? That's all I need to know. Do I need a lawyer? Because it seems like you're trying to blame me for it.
No, I'm not trying to blame you.
Because, like I said, I can't.
Jalil, I'm not trying to blame you for anything. I'm trying to find out the truth.
You're trying to put pressure on anybody that you're talking to, trying to get more information because he was minimizing his involvement. We knew that. Once we start telling him that, we hope that more information is going to come out of him. And in this case, he decided he didn't want to talk anymore. There's a delicate balance there. Do you go too far, or do you not say enough, or do you say too much? In this case, I think he knew that we knew as investigators that there was more out there that we weren't going to tell him, and he sensed that, so he decided he didn't want to say anymore.
I want to protect myself, but...
Okay. Is that how you want to do it?
I mean, you're blaming,
I'm not...
Okay. I don't know what you're trying to get. You're blaming.
No, Jalil, I'm not blaming you, man. I just wanted your side. I wanted the truth. That's it.
That.
We were on a good move. We were doing good things. And that's cool. If you want to lawyer, we'll arrange it. Okay. So just sit tight, and I'm gonna step out.
I'm going to jail.
So now we're coming to a dead end to a certain degree. Jalil's lawyered up, Earl has lawyered up, so we've got to try to figure out what exactly happened. If we can identify the suspect, time is of the essence. We got to get moving.
During this time, with the fact that we have 2 suspects that are not providing much information, a search warrant is obtained for Earl Martin's home. The search warrant is executed, and we're looking for any evidentiary value, any clothing items, weapons, blood, trace evidence, anything at all that will link him to the actual shooting scene. Ultimately, the search warrant did provide some very useful evidence in this case. Bloody clothing was found in Earl Martin's residence, and the clothing matched the video surveillance of this older black male with a tan jacket. We also found a bag containing a .380 handgun. with some marijuana in the actual bag and some unspent rounds, bullets. And from there, that evidence being sent to the lab and later on came back and confirmed that the blood on the clothing belonged to Steve, and the handgun, the bullets matched the firearms and casings that were found at the scene of the crime. Detectives also obtained search warrants for both cell phones belonging to Jaleel Fellows and Earl Martin, and the information that was recovered from those cell phones proved 100% that both of those people, Earl Martin and Jaleel Fellows, both knew that there was going to be a robbery attempt, and that was apparently the actual plan to rob Steve of his money and marijuana. But Earl Martin is the actual shooter. So with that information all coming together, there was enough evidence where arrest warrants were obtained for both Earl Martin and Jaleel Fellows.
About half a year after the incident occurred, Jaleel decided this is one to speak with detectives at headquarters. What had happened was that Earl Martin's homicide case was coming up, and Jaleel knew that. And I think Jaleel wanted a little bit better type of sentence. So what he did is he came downtown with his lawyer, and he actually decided he wanted to go through the whole process of what had happened before this case actually made it to the courtroom.
Jaleel, really, I'm perfectly okay with just basically starting from the beginning. We discussed before your relationship, how you knew Earl Martin. You know what I mean? And I don't doubt you told me 100% the truth on everything. I don't have any reason to doubt that. But with that said, if anything is different, it's okay. It's not a big deal. Don't feel like, I got to stick to my guns because I've already told him something once. Okay, don't worry about that. Don't even think about it. So if you would, man, just start me with how you met Earl, and we'll just work our way forward to the end.
I met Earl at work. I was his boss. He was a pretty good worker for me, and like we just kind of just talked about stuff with like kids and stuff like that. We really didn't talk about much. But then we started talking about like trying to find out a way to get some quick money or whatever. And that's how it came up on the robbery scheme. And he asked me if I knew anybody, and I told him no at first, but then I really did know some people. So then I thought about it, and I just sent him a text saying that we could hit up my plug or whatever. And that's whenever the plan got into motion, I guess. I told him he could hit him up. If I had asked him if I could get out his number first.
So Jaleel did admit to being involved in the robbery and that he had actually set it up, but he said he didn't know anything about Earl and his intention to murder Christopher or shoot anybody on the scene there. So that was very important for us.
Okay, do you remember having just a communication with him other than the text messages? If you did and don't remember, I get it, but I just want to know what you remember.
I really don't. I couldn't tell you. The only thing I remember was the text messages that we were sending, and then he told me that he asked if he could call me, and I said yeah in one of the text messages, and then he called me. He's like, you'll see. He's like, stuff went bad, and you'll see it on the news. That's all he said, and then we hung up, and that was the last we talked.
Okay. So that was afterwards.
Yeah.
I see the text. I know the text.
It had been afterwards because he just like stuff went bad, and you'll see it on the news. That's basically what he told me, and then I seen it on the news, like where it kind of happened or whatever. So that's how I really figured out like what was going on.
For the crimes involving Christopher Hoffling and Steve, the charges for Earl Martin are murder, robbery with serious bodily injury, murder attempted with a firearm, and kidnapping while hijacking a vehicle. Earl Martin is convicted and sentenced to 135 years in prison. Jaleel Fellows is convicted of robbery. He's sentenced to 5 years as part of a plea deal.
I believe that Steve and Christopher that night got in way over their head with a career criminal. Earl Martin's a bad guy. He's proven that his whole life. He's in and out. He's a frequent flyer in our system. So Jaleel, even though he minimized his involvement, he had set it up. He knew what was going to happen, that Steve and Christopher were going to get robbed. They had met in the parking lot. Earl Martin got in the back seat of the car, and he instantly just shot both Steve and Christopher. Steve was able to get out of the vehicle and survive. Unfortunately, Christopher, he didn't survive.
I feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions with this situation that happened. Why did those things happen to him? And honestly, it's still unbelievable. It's almost surreal. It doesn't feel like reality. You know, you feel like, oh, I'm still gonna run into him again. You know, I'm gonna see him at the mall and he's gonna be like, hey, Bridget, what's up? You know, you don't wanna believe it. I don't think you'll ever get complete closure when you lose somebody. I mean, you learn to cope with it and things like that, but there's always gonna be that thought, you know, of that person still there, and that's gonna bring back those memories, and you're gonna realize they're not here anymore. And that's the toughest part is, you know, what ifs, what if things would have went differently that night? Where would Christopher be at now? What would he be doing? Would he have a family of his own? You'll never know. There'll always be times in my life where I'll think of him and think about how wrong it is for people to be doing this to other people. So he'll never be forgotten.
The note was no bigger than a matchbook, yellowed by time, folded once, then fold again, as if whoever wrote it never intended it to be found, and yet somehow always knew it would be. It surfaced in the winter of man's life, tucked inside a retired detective's desk, beneath old precinct photographs and a service revolver that hadn't been fired in decades. And when the ink finally saw the light again, it carried a date that snapped New York backward in time. 1975, back to a year when the city breathed through cracked lips, when sirens were constant, when fear was just another layer of grime on the sidewalks. The note contained only 6 words and a name, and for 48 hours after it was discovered, the name did not mean anything to anyone. Then someone cross-checked it. Then someone else went quiet. Then phones started ringing in offices that hadn't handled homicide files from the 70s and years, and the phrase, New York 1975 cold case solved, began to flicker across internal emails long before it ever reached a headline. In 1975, the city was tired. The lights of Times Square burned bright, but behind them were bankrupt budgets, empty patrol cars, and neighborhoods where the police response time stretched long enough for violence to finish its work. That summer, the heat pressed down like a hand on the back of the neck, and in a narrow apartment on the Lower East Side, a woman named Eleanor Weiss stopped answering her phone. She was 32, a legal secretary by day, a creature of routine by nature, same subway car every morning, same diner on Delancey for coffee, same call to her sister every Sunday night. When the call didn't come, it felt wrong. When Monday passed without a word, it felt dangerous. By Wednesday, the fear had shape. By Thursday, her landlord unlocked the door. The apartment was clean, too clean, no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture. The windows were shut against the heat. Her purse sat on the kitchen table, wallet inside, cash untouched. Her shoes were by the door, placed neatly side by side, toes facing outward, as if she had stepped out barefoot for just a moment. The bed was made. The bathroom sink was dry. Eleanor Weiss had vanished without leaving the chaos that usually followed violence, and that absence of mess was the first thing that bothered the detectives. New York homicide units were used to noise, blood, broken glass, neighbors yelling from a hallway. This was silence, arranged silence, the kind that suggested intention. They canvassed the building. A neighbor on the 3rd floor reported hearing footsteps late Saturday night, light steps, then heavier ones, then the sound of the front door closing softly, not slammed, not rushed. Another tenant thought she saw Eleanor earlier that evening with a man in the lobby, tall, dark coat, face indistinct in the dim light, the kind of description that could fit half the city. The doorman on the next block remembered nothing. The diner waitress remembered Eleanor leaving at her usual time, alone, stirring her coffee 3 times before standing up. Routine right up until the moment it broke. The newspapers latched on fast. Young woman vanishes in Lower East Side mystery. No body, no clues, no answers. The phrase cold case wasn't used yet, not like it would be later, but the idea was already there, settling in, waiting. Detectives traced Eleanor's last steps through a city that swallowed people whole. They pulled phone records, sparse and unhelpful. They questioned co-workers who described her as quiet, reliable, forgettable in a way that made a person safe until they weren't. They spoke to her sister, who insisted Eleanor had no secrets, no enemies, no reason to disappear. And then there was the boyfriend. His name was never printed in full in the early articles, just a first initial and an age. But in the precinct, everyone knew him. A jazz musician, unsteady work, late nights, a temper that flared and burned out just as fast. He admitted to seeing Eleanor the night she vanished, admitted to an argument, admitted to leaving her apartment angry but unharmed. There were no witnesses to contradict him, no marks on the walls, no blood to scrape. In 1975, without a body, without forensics that could reach through time, suspicion was smoke with nothing solid to cling to. The boyfriend lawyered up. The detectives pushed. The case stalled. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor's face faded from the front pages, replaced by newer horrors, louder crimes. The file thickened with dead ends, sightings that went nowhere, tips that contradicted each other. A woman who looked like Eleanor seen boarding a bus in Port Authority. A woman with her hair spotted in a bar in Queens. Each lead collapsed under scrutiny. The city kept moving. The detectives aged. The silence in that apartment became just another unanswered question in a system already drowning in them. By the end of the year, the file was stamped inactive. Not closed, not solved, just waiting. Waiting for a body. Waiting for a confession. Waiting for time to do what time always did. Erase edges, dull memories. Make certainty impossible. Eleanor Weiss became one of many. A name spoken less and less, a photograph that yellowed along with the paper it was printed on, and yet, somewhere in the city, the truth was still breathing. The detective who would one day leave that note was young then, fresh enough to believe that every missing person had a solution if you just looked hard enough. He worked the case obsessively, returning to the apartment, replaying the timeline, reading and rereading witness statements until he could recite them from memory. He fixated on small things, the shoes by the door, the untouched purse, the way the neighbor described the footsteps, not panicked, not rushed. He wrote questions in the margins of the file. Who leave their shoes behind? Who closes a door softly after a crime? Who wants the scene to look calm? There was one lead he never let go of, a name buried in a witness statement from the first week, almost an afterthought. A maintenance worker who'd been repairing a boiler in the building next door mentioned seeing a man in the alley behind Eleanor's apartment late Saturday night, standing by a parked car with the engine running. The worker thought it was strange because the car was idling for a long time, too long, and because the man kept looking up at the windows as if waiting for a signal. The description was vague, the plate number unreadable in the dark. The report was filed, then lost among hundreds of others. But the detective circled it in red. He tracked down similar reports. Other missing women. Other alleys. Other cars idling too long in the heat. Patterns that didn't quite line up, but felt close enough to touch. His superiors told him he was reaching. The city didn't have the resources for intuition. They needed facts. They needed bodies. When he pushed too hard, he was reassigned. The Eleanor Weiss file went back into the cabinet. Years passed. The detective built a career. Promotions came. New partners. New cases. The city changed its face, then changed it again. Technology advanced. Witnesses died. The boyfriend moved out of state, remarried, was cleared in the court of public opinion simply by surviving long enough. Eleanor's sister stopped calling the precinct every year on the anniversary, her voice growing older, thinner, until it stopped altogether. The case slipped from memory, but not from the detectives. When he retired, he took nothing official with him. No files, no evidence, just a habit of thinking about unfinished things. He kept notebooks, personal ones, where he wrote down names and fragments, ideas he never proved. And somewhere in those pages, he wrote 6 words and a name. He didn't explain them. He didn't date the note beyond the year that mattered. He folded it small, as if trying to contain its weight. Decades later, when his daughter began sorting through his belongings after the funeral, the note fell out of the desk drawer and onto the floor. She didn't recognize the name. She almost threw it away. Almost. Something about the careful way it was written made her pause. She searched it online. Nothing came up at first. Then she added another term. 1975. Missing. And suddenly, the past opened its mouth. Within days, the note was in the hands of detectives who had never walked the city as it was in the 70s, who had only seen it in grainy photos and old crime scene tapes. They pulled the Eleanor Weiss file. They read it with fresh eyes. They ran the name through databases that didn't exist when the case went cold. And this time, the name didn't vanish into static. This time, it led somewhere dark and specific to a man who had lived quietly for decades, who had been adjacent to violence without ever being touched by it, who had left no obvious trail. A man who, according to the systems now humming with data, had been in the right place at the right time, too often to be coincidence. The city barely remembered Eleanor Weiss, but the city remembered how to be shocked. As whispers of a breakthrough spread, reporters dusted off old headlines. Neighbors tried to recall a woman they'd passed on the stairs half a lifetime ago, and the phrase "cold case solved" hovered in the air, heavy with promise. But before the press conferences, before the official statements, there was just that note, those 6 words, and the unsettling realization that the truth had been waiting patiently, folded small, for someone to finally open it. The name on the note did not belong to a monster in the obvious sense, not to a man already cataloged by the city's nightmares, but to someone whose life slid neatly between the cracks of attention, a man who paid his taxes, renewed his license on time, and left no digital echo until the system was taught how to listen for him. When detectives pulled the thread, the first surprise was how long it took before anything appeared at all. Years of clean lines and ordinary addresses, employment records that rose and fell with the economy, a marriage that lasted long enough to look real, and ended quietly enough to raise no alarms. The second surprise came when locations began to stack, not in a straight line, but in a constellation, points scattered across the map of New York like a message that only made sense once you stepped back and squinted. In the mid-'70s, the man lived in a rent-stabilized walk-up 3 blocks from Eleanor Weiss's apartment. Close enough to walk home, close enough to hear sirens fade, close enough to blend into the night without ever needing a car. That detail snagged immediately because a maintenance worker's statement had mentioned a vehicle idling in the alley, and the contradiction bothered the detectives in a way that felt familiar, like deja vu borrowed from a man who had already asked these questions decades earlier. They dug deeper and found a second address, temporary, unremarkable, a sublet tied to a cousin who left the city abruptly in 1976. The car appeared there, registered under a different name, parked overnight in places that matched no job and no social pattern. Suddenly the alley made sense, not as a necessity, but as an option. They began reconstructing a life backward, layering new data over old paper, overlaying transit records that survived by accident with payroll slips that shouldn't have mattered but did. The man worked maintenance for a theater off Broadway for 2 years, nights mostly, access to spaces people stopped noticing once the curtain fell. He volunteered as a driver for a community center on weekends, ferrying donations, sometimes people, through neighborhoods that didn't ask questions if you looked like you belonged. He moved often, never far, always just enough to reset the way neighbors remembered him. No arrests, no restraining orders, no obvious violence. A ghost who paid rent. When the detectives tracked down people who had known him, the answers came in fragments, reluctant and thin. A former co-worker remembered him as quiet, polite, forgettable. A neighbor recalled lending him sugar once, maybe twice. Couldn't remember his face, but remembered his hands, clean, steady, the kind of hands you trusted with small favors. An ex-wife, now living in Florida, paused for a long time before speaking, then said there were nights when he came home late and showered immediately, scrubbing as if he couldn't get something off his skin, but she had assumed it was the city, the grime, the job. Everyone had an explanation. No one had a warning. The detectives returned to the Eleanor Weiss file and read it again, slower this time, listening for echoes. They noticed the timing of the footsteps, late enough for most of the building to be asleep, early enough to avoid the noise of bars emptying. They noticed the door closing softly, a detail that suggested familiarity with the space, with the sound it made, with the need to leave nothing behind that might wake a neighbor. They noticed the shoes by the door, not kicked off, not abandoned in a hurry, but placed. It felt less like an interruption and more like a transition, a moment when Eleanor believed she was stepping into something brief, something that would end with her returning to finish what she'd started. There were no fingerprints to test, no DNA preserved, but the city had changed the rules since 1975. The alley behind the apartment had been resurfaced in the 80s. But before that, it had been photographed repeatedly during a sanitation study, images archived and forgotten. In one of those frames, grainy and distant, a car idled near the mouth of the alley, its shape indistinct, its plate unreadable, but its presence undeniable. Cross-referencing that image with parking tickets from the surrounding blocks turned up something small and sharp, a citation issued the same night, the same hour, a few streets over, to a vehicle registered under the cousin's name. It wasn't proof. It was pressure. Pressure accumulated in other ways. The man had been questioned once before, in 1977, in connection with another missing woman, a waitress from Midtown who vanished after a late shift. The case dissolved quickly, witnesses unreliable, the city distracted by larger crimes, but the address on file matched the second apartment. That file had never been linked to Eleanor Weiss, never placed side by side, because in 1977 no one had the time or the tools to notice the overlap. Now, the overlap glowed. As word of the reopened investigation leaked, the community began to react the way it always did when the past threatened to become present again. Old neighbors called radio shows, claiming memories that sharpened overnight. A man insisted he'd seen Eleanor arguing with someone in the stairwell weeks before she disappeared. A woman claimed she heard crying through the walls, a sound she dismissed at the time as television noise. Each new statement added noise, but beneath it the detectives kept tracing the same quiet path, the one the retired detective had marked with 6 words and a name. They located the man in upstate New York, living alone in a house that faced a river, the kind of place people chose when they wanted to watch something move without being moved themselves. He was in his 70s now, his hair thin, his back bent, his hands still steady. When detectives knocked, he opened the door without hesitation, as if he'd been expecting them for years. He agreed to talk. He offered coffee. He spoke carefully, choosing words that revealed nothing and everything at once. He remembered Eleanor Weiss. He remembered the building. He remembered the summer heat. He denied hurting her. He denied knowing what happened after that night. He admitted to being in the alley waiting, but said it was for someone else, a friend, a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. His story shifted in small ways, not enough to break, but enough to bend. He couldn't explain why he'd lied in 1977 about where he lived. He couldn't explain why he'd sold the car 2 weeks after Eleanor vanished, for cash, without paperwork. He couldn't explain why his notebooks from that year were missing, why a man so meticulous about everything else had a blank space where memory should have been. The detectives left without an arrest. The headlines were cautious, conditional. New lead in 1975 cold case. Retired detective's note sparks renewed hope. Hope, fragile and dangerous, settled over the story like dust. Eleanor Weiss's name was spoken again, her photograph reprinted, her life condensed into a column of facts and a haunting absence. Her sister's children, grown now, read about an aunt they barely remembered. The city waited. Behind the scenes, prosecutors debated the strength of a case built on inference and time. Defense attorneys prepared for a fight rooted in reasonable doubt and the unreliability of memory. The detectives kept digging, not because they were sure of the ending, but because the shape of the truth had begun to emerge. And once you see a shape, you can't unsee it. They found receipts for a rope purchased in 1975, stored for years, then discarded. They found a storage unit rented briefly, paid in cash, empty before anyone thought to look. They found a pattern of disappearance that had never been named because it had never been complete. The man watched the news from his quiet house by the river, his face reflected faintly in the glass. He knew what the note meant. He had known at the moment the story broke, the moment the past leaned forward and cleared its throat. Whether the case would be declared solved or remain suspended in that uneasy space between accusation and certainty was still unclear, but something had already changed. The silence that had protected him for decades was gone, replaced by the low, relentless hum of attention. And somewhere in the city, the echo of footsteps on the stairwell seemed suddenly louder, as if the building itself had been waiting for this moment to remember what it had once heard. The pressure did not explode all at once. It seeped, slow and deliberate, into every crack the man had sealed over the years, turning the quiet life by the river into a place with no shadows left to hide in. And as the detectives widened the lens, the case stopped being just about Eleanor Weiss and started to look like something the city had missed because it did not yet know how to name it. In 1975, New York had no language for patterns that took decades to reveal themselves, no databases to whisper connections across time, only filing cabinets of human memory, both fragile and easily overwhelmed. And now those old limitations were being peeled back one layer at a time. They began with geography, mapping the man's movements year by year, address by address, noticing how he never crossed certain boundaries, how his world curved around specific subway lines, how his jobs placed him close to transient populations, women who worked late, women who lived alone, women whose routines made them predictable without making them reckless. Eleanor Weiss fit that profile perfectly, but she was not the only one. When detectives overlaid missing persons reports from the mid to late 70s, names that had never shared a page suddenly crowded together, cases dismissed as runaways, accidents, fresh starts that never materialized. The common thread was not how these women lived, but how they disappeared, quietly, without spectacle, leaving behind rooms that looked as if someone had simply pressed pause. One case stood out because it echoed Eleanor's too closely to ignore. In 1978, a woman named Marjorie Klein vanished from a studio apartment in Midtown, her shoes placed by the door, her purse on the table, her bed made, her life interrupted without visible violence. At the time, police chalked it up to a voluntary disappearance, a theory her family never accepted but could not disprove. The boyfriend was questioned, cleared, forgotten. The file gathered dust. Now, 40 years later, detectives found that Marjorie's building shared a back alley with a theater where the man had worked nights. The timing aligned. The routines overlapped. The silence spoke. As the list grew, so did the weight of what it suggested. These were not crimes of passion, not moments of loss of control, but acts that required patience, planning, and an understanding of how invisibility worked in a city that never stopped moving. The man's interviews from decades earlier, re-examined, revealed slips that no one had noticed the first time, references to spaces he shouldn't have known, to routines he claimed not to observe. His denials were consistent, but consistency, the detectives knew, could be rehearsed. They returned to the notebooks recovered from his house, the ones he kept from the 80s onward, filled with meticulous entries about weather, errands, maintenance schedules, and in the margins, small notations that meant nothing until you placed them against the old cases. A date circled here, a street name underlined there. Nothing explicit, nothing illegal, but when aligned with the disappearances, the pattern tightened. These notebooks did not confess. They remembered. The legal debate intensified. Prosecutors worried about statute limitations, about the fragility of cases built without physical evidence, about juries skeptical of stories resurrected after half a lifetime. Detectives countered with the reality of cold cases, with the argument that time did not erase truth, only buried it. They brought in behavioral analysts who described a man who sought control without confrontation, who preferred silence to chaos, who believed that the absence of body was not just a shield but a victory. The analysts spoke of ritual, of placement, of the deliberate calm left behind as a signature. The shoes by the door were not coincidence. They were punctuation. As the investigation deepened, the city began to confront its own reflection in the case. In 1975, Eleanor Weiss was a single woman living alone in a neighborhood that was already being written off. Her disappearance another data point in a city struggling to keep its head above water. Resources were thin, priorities brutal. Cases without blood or witnesses fell quickly to the bottom of the pile. The detectives working the case then had felt the pressure, the impossible math of deciding which lives could be chased and which had to be left behind. Now, with hindsight sharpened by technology, the cost of those decisions came into focus. And it was heavy. The man was brought in for a second interview, this time under different rules. The room was brighter, the questions narrower. The detectives placed copies of the notebooks on the table, photographs from the alleys, timelines that closed around him like a net. He listened without interrupting, his expression steady, his eyes occasionally flicking to details he recognized before catching himself. When confronted with the similarities between Eleanor Weiss and Marjorie Klein, he shook his head slowly, as if disappointed, as if the detectives had misunderstood something fundamental. He insisted again that he had never harmed anyone. That coincidence was not crime. That memory was unreliable, especially after so long. Then they showed him the note. It was a calculated risk, one debated late into the night, but the effect was immediate. His breathing changed, just enough to notice, a hitch he could not suppress. He asked where they got it. He asked who had written it. When told it came from a retired detective, long dead, he looked down at his hands, the same steady hands people remembered, and for a moment the room felt like it had slipped back in time. He said nothing more, but silence, in that moment, said plenty. The detectives did not leave the room believing they had a confession. They left believing they had confirmation, the kind that lived in the space between words. The man was released again, but the investigation accelerated. Search warrants followed. Storage facilities were re-examined. A stretch of riverbank near his current home was searched, not because they expected to find Eleanor after all these years, but because absence had taught them where to look. They found nothing conclusive, but they found traces, fibers that suggested rope, fragments of fabric that did not match anything he owned now, but matched descriptions in the past. Each find was small. Together, they formed a picture. Public opinion shifted as details leaked. The headlines grew bolder. Pattern emerges in 1970s disappearances. One man linked to multiple cold cases. For families who had lived with uncertainty for decades, the coverage was both a relief and a wound reopened. Some welcomed the attention, desperate for answers no matter how late. Others recoiled, fearing hope that might collapse again. Eleanor Weiss's sister had passed away years earlier, but her children spoke for her now, voices shaking as they described a woman they remembered through stories and photographs, a presence defined by absence. The man's defense team began shaping its narrative, emphasizing the lack of bodies, the reliance on circumstantial evidence, the danger of retrofitting patterns to fit a suspect. They argued that the city was eager for closure, that the note from a dead detective was romantic but unreliable, that memory could be manipulated by time and expectation. It was a strong argument. The detectives knew it. They also knew that the truth of what happened in 1975 did not care how difficult it was to prove. As the case moved closer to a decision point, the retired detective's role loomed larger, his quiet persistence reframed as foresight. Colleagues who had once dismissed his fixation now revisited old conversations, moments when he had insisted something was wrong, when he had refused to let go of a name no one else remembered. They wondered what he had known, what he had suspected, and why he had chosen to compress it into 6 words rather than write it all down. Perhaps he had feared being wrong. Perhaps he had known that proof would only come when the world caught up. In the end, the investigation reached a threshold where every answer produced another question, where every step forward revealed how much had been lost time. The city held its breath, suspended between the promise of resolution and the reality of uncertainty. The man by the river continued his routines, aware now that they were being watched, that the quiet he had cultivated was no longer his alone. And somewhere in the machinery of justice, the case turned slowly, grinding decades into days, carrying with it the weight of women who had stepped out of their apartments believing they would return and never did. By the time the district attorney agreed to move forward, the case no longer belonged to the past alone. It belonged to the president in a way that made everyone uneasy, because it forced the city to admit that something had lived among it for years without a name, without a file thick enough to stop it. The charge was narrow, deliberately so, focused on Eleanor Weiss, because prosecutors knew that juries needed a single story before they could absorb a pattern, one life before they could imagine many. The announcement landed with a dull thud rather than an explosion, but the shock spread anyway, through newsrooms, through precinct halls, through families who had waited decades to hear a voice say that their missing was not forgotten. The man surrendered quietly. No handcuffs on the front steps. No cameras catching a struggle. He walked into the courthouse with the same controlled posture he had carried all his life, as if even now he believed calm might protect him. Inside, the air felt heavier, thick with the accumulated weight of years that had been sealed off and were now being pried open. Reporters crowded the hallway, whispering the same phrases over and over. 1975, cold case, finally solved. Words that felt premature even as they filled the space. The arraignment was brief, procedural, but every detail took on significance. The way he avoided looking at the gallery. The way his lawyer placed a hand lightly on his arm, guiding rather than restraining. The way the judge paused before reading the charge, as if aware of the time folded into that moment. Not guilty was entered, expected and yet jarring, a reminder that the story was not finished simply because the city wanted it to be. Outside, Eleanor Weiss's name surged back into public consciousness. Old classmates were interviewed. Former co-workers searched their memories for anything they might have missed. The apartment building on the Lower East Side became a destination again. Reporters filming the stairwell, the front door, the narrow hallway where footsteps had once echoed and then vanished. Current tenants watched from behind curtains, living their present lives inside a structure now haunted by someone else's past. Inside the prosecutor's office, the case was rehearsed again and again, every line tested, every inference challenged. They built the narrative carefully, not as a story of evil, but as a story of absence, of a woman who did not come home, and a man whose life intersected with that absence too precisely to dismiss. They leaned on the notebooks, on the geography, on the behavior analysts who explained why some crimes leave no marks. They knew the defense would attack the lack of physical evidence, would argue that the city was mistaking coincidence for connection. They prepared to counter with accumulation, with the idea that no single fact convicted, but together they formed something undeniable. The defense strategy was just as meticulous. They painted the man as a victim of time, a convenient answer to questions the city had failed to solve when it mattered most. They emphasized the dangers of nostalgia masquerading as justice, of using modern tools to reinterpret the past. They called experts to testify about memory distortion, about the unreliability of witnesses recalling events from 40 years ago. They framed the note as a symbol, not proof, a relic of obsession rather than insight. As pretrial hearings unfolded, cracks appeared in unexpected places. A former detective from the 70s took the stand and described the pressure to clear cases quickly, the unspoken understanding that disappearances without bodies were liabilities. He admitted, with visible discomfort, that Eleanor Weiss's case had been deprioritized not because it lacked merit, but because the city lacked capacity. His testimony did not assign blame, but did provide context, a backdrop of exhaustion and triage that made the original failure easier to understand and harder to forgive. Another witness emerged from the shadows of the past, a woman now in her 80s who had lived across the alley in 1975. She had never spoken to police before, had assumed what she saw meant nothing. On the stand, her voice trembled as she described waking late one night to the sound of an engine idling, looking out her window and seeing a man standing beside a car, watching the building across from her. She could not identify him now. She could not swear to the date. But she remembered the feeling, the sense that she was witnessing something she should not be witnessing. The defense objected. The judge allowed it. The courtroom listened. Public reaction oscillated between certainty and doubt. Talk radio hosts declared the case solved, praising the perseverance of a retired detective whose note had sparked the investigation. Others warned against celebrating too soon, reminding listeners that the law demanded proof, not patterns. Online forums filled with amateur analysis, timelines drawn and redrawn, theories competing for dominance. In all of it, Eleanor Weiss risked becoming secondary again, her life reduced to a vessel for argument. The prosecution tried to counter that by humanizing her, bringing in photographs, letters, small details that anchored her in reality. They spoke of her routines not as evidence of predictability, but as evidence of a life lived with intention. They described her apartment not as a crime scene, but as a space abruptly abandoned. The defense objected to emotion. The judge overruled, reminding the court that victims were not abstractions. As the trial approached, the man's composure began to fracture in subtle ways. He lost weight. His notebooks, once neat and consistent, became erratic, entries skipping days, handwriting tightening as if pulled inward. During one meeting with his lawyers, he asked, unexpectedly, whether the city still looked the same at night. The question lingered unanswered. Behind the scenes, detectives continued to chase leads that could strengthen the case, even as the clock ticked toward opening statements. A forgotten storage facility resurfaced, its records preserved by accident rather than design. Inside, they found items that could not be definitively linked to Eleanor Weiss, but aligned with the pattern they had built. Personal effects without owners, remnants of lives paused and never resumed. The discovery was both validation and frustration, adding weight without clarity. The trial began under a gray sky. The courthouse steps slick with rain, the atmosphere charged but restrained. Opening statements laid out two competing realities. The prosecution spoke of patience, of a man who understood how to disappear people without spectacle. The defense spoke of doubt, of a system reaching backward to correct its own failures. The jury listened, faces careful, aware that whatever conclusion they reached would echo far beyond the room. As testimony unfolded, the retired detective's presence hovered like a ghost. His name was spoken often, his methods scrutinized, his instincts dissected. Some witnesses praised his tenacity. Others questioned his refusal to let go. In that tension, the case found its emotional core, the line between obsession and justice, between knowing and believing. The note, still no bigger than a matchbook, was entered into evidence, passed from hand to hand, its 6 words absorbing the weight of expectation. Days blurred together. Experts debated behavior. Neighbors revisited memories. The man sat through it all, occasionally closed his eyes as if listening to something only he could hear. When Eleanor Weiss's photograph was displayed, he did not look away. He looked longer than anyone else. By the time closing arguments approached, the city had begun to prepare itself for either outcome. If the jury convicted, the case would be heralded as a triumph of persistence, a cold case finally solved by the quiet foresight of a man who refused to forget. If they acquitted, the story would harden into something more troubling, a reminder that truth and proof did not always align, that some questions resisted closure no matter how badly it was desired. In the jury room, deliberations began without drama, 12 people grappling with decades they had not lived, trying to measure absence and intention with tools designed for the present. Outside, the rain stopped. Inside, the case waited, suspended between resolution and return to silence, its outcome still uncertain, its impact already irreversible. Deliberations stretched longer than anyone predicted, not because the jury was careless, but because the case demanded a kind of attention most modern trials rarely ask for, a willingness to sit with uncertainty and weigh it without rushing toward relief. Inside the jury room, timelines were taped to the wall, photographs spread across the table. The note passed hand to hand again, its 6 words now familiar enough to feel dangerous. Some jurors fixated on the notebooks, the way dates aligned too neatly with disappearances to be coincidence. Others returned again and again to the same absence, the same hollow center. No body, no confession, no moment where the truth rose up and declared itself without ambiguity. They argued quietly at first, then with more urgency, voices rising not in anger but in frustration. How much did pattern matter when the law demanded specificity? How far could inference stretch before it snapped? Whether a man could be held responsible for what he had erased so completely. Outside the room, the city waited, counting the hours, reading meaning into every delay. In the courtroom, Eleanor Weiss's photograph remained on the evidence screen, her eyes steady, her expression frozen in a moment before everything changed. The man sat at the defense table, his posture rigid, his gaze unfocused, as if he were watching something unfold far beyond the walls of the courthouse. His lawyers whispered strategy, contingency, appeals. The prosecutors reviewed their notes, prepared for questions that might never come. When the jury finally returned, the room stilled in a way that felt almost physical, the air tightening as if the building itself was holding its breath. The foreperson stood, hands trembling just enough to notice, and read the verdict. Not guilty. The words landed unevenly, absorbed differently by every person in the room. For the defense, it was relief edged with exhaustion. For the prosecution, a blow softened only by the knowledge that they had brought the truth as close to the surface as the law allowed. In the gallery, reactions fractured along invisible lines, some faces collapsing inward, others hardening, a few nodding as if confirmation of something they had always believed. The judge thanked the jury for their service, his voice measured, his expression unreadable. The man was free to go, the weight of decades lifting from his shoulders in a way that was almost imperceptible. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He gathered his papers, adjusted his coat, and walked out of the courtroom with the same controlled calm that had carried him through his life, as if acquittal was not an ending but a continuation. Outside, microphones clustered, cameras clicked, questions flew. Was justice served? Was the city wrong? Could a case be solved without a conviction? The headline split almost immediately. 1975 cold case ends in acquittal. Eleanor Weiss mystery remains. Retired detective's note sparks trial, not closure. The word solve retreated, replaced by qualifiers, by doubt. For the families of the missing women whose names had surfaced during the trial, the verdict reopened old wounds. Some felt betrayed by a system that acknowledged a pattern but refused to name a culprit. Others found a strange comfort in the attention, in the validation that their loved ones' disappearances had not been random, not imagined, not forgotten. Eleanor Weiss's nieces spoke briefly to reporters, their voices steady despite the tremor beneath. They said the verdict did not change what they believed. They said the truth was larger than the courtroom. The man returned to his house by the river, now under a different kind of watch. Neighbors avoided his gaze. Cars slowed as they passed. He resumed his routines, but the quiet had changed texture, no longer protective, no longer as alone. He burned his notebooks one by one in a metal bin behind the house, watching the pages curl and blacken, watching decades of careful notation dissolve into smoke. He told himself it was time to let go. Inside the precinct, the detectives confronted a familiar hollow feeling, the one that followed cases where effort did not translate into resolution. Some questioned whether the trial had been a mistake, whether bringing the case forward without physical evidence had risked turning belief into disappointment. Others argued that the trial had been necessary, that truth did not require conviction to exist. The retired detective's colleague spoke his name again, wondering what he would have thought, whether he would have seen the acquittal as failure or as proof that he had been right all along to keep his certainty folded small. The note returned to evidence storage, labeled, cataloged, its power diminished but not erased. It had done what it could, carried a message across time, forced a reckoning. What remained was the aftermath, the long tale of a case that refused to settle into a single meaning. In the months that followed, investigators continued to pursue peripheral leads, freed in some ways by the absence of trial pressure. They re-examined other disappearances, cross-referencing details with the same patient scrutiny, no longer focused on one man alone but on a method, a way of erasing people that might have been used by others as well. The idea was unsettling, but it was also clarifying. Eleanor Weiss's case was no longer singular. It was a warning. Public interest faded, as it always did, replaced by newer stories, louder crimes. But the case left a residue in the city's consciousness, a reminder that some mysteries were not puzzles to be solved but scars to be acknowledged. The Lower East Side apartment building stood unchanged, its stairwell repainted, its tenants rotating, its walls absorbing new lives while holding the echo of old ones. Years later, long after the cameras were gone, a maintenance crew renovating the building discovered something tucked behind a wall panel in the basement, wrapped in plastic. hidden with a care that suggested both panic and planning. Inside were personal items, unremarkable on their own, devastating in context. A woman's scarf, a compact mirror, a set of keys with no address attached. The items could not be definitively linked to Eleanor Weiss, not after so much time, but their existence shifted the ground beneath the case once again. The discovery reignited debate. Had the wrong man been tried? Had the right man escaped? Or was the truth more complex, dispersed across years and actors, resistant to a single narrative? The items were logged, tested, archived, their potential forever constrained by what time had taken. The man by the river watched the news of the discovery in silence, his face betraying nothing. He had aged further, his movements slower, his world shrinking. Whether he felt relief or fear was impossible to tell. The city speculated. The detectives watched. The case remained, unresolved in the way that mattered most. Eleanor Weiss's name appeared less often now, but it did not disappear again. It lived in training seminars, in discussions about cold cases and the ethics of reopening wounds, in conversations about how justice measured success. Her story became a reference point, a cautionary tale about patience, about persistence, about the limits of certainty. In the end, the verdict did not close the case. It changed it. It transformed a mystery into a question that refused to fade, a reminder that some truths existed in tension with proof, that some crimes left only patterns and absences behind. The retired detective's note had cracked something open, but what lay inside was not resolution. It was a deeper unease, a recognition that the city had once been a place where silence could be engineered, where people could vanish without leaving enough behind to anchor them to justice. And as the river continued to move past a man's house, steady and indifferent, the city carried on, louder than ever, built on layers of stories it told and stories it never fully could, with Eleanor Weiss's absence woven into its fabric, unresolved, enduring, and impossible to forget. The discovery in the basement did not arrive with sirens or breaking news banners. It crept back into the story like a draft through a cracked window, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore once people felt it. The items were ordinary in a way that made them unbearable. A scarf that still held a faded pattern, a compact mirror scratched along one edge, keys worn smooth by hands that had once reached for a door that never opened again. Detectives photographed everything, cataloged everything, spoke in careful language about possibilities and limits, but the implications seeped out anyway, carrying the quiet suggestion that the city might have buried more than it realized beneath its own foundations. The building's tenants watched from the sidewalk as evidence bags were carried out, their curiosity tangled with unease. Some had lived there for years without knowing what the walls might contain. Others wondered how many times they had passed within inches of a secret that old. The superintendent answered questions with a shrug, insisting renovations turned up strange things all the time, old pipes, forgotten boxes, the detritus of decades. But this was different. This had intention. This had been hidden. For detectives, the find reopened doors they had just begun to close. They compared the items to missing persons reports, to photographs provided by families who had learned not to hope too loudly. The scarf matched nothing definitively. The keys fit no locks that still existed. The mirror carried no usable prints. Time had done its work thoroughly. Still, the location mattered. The basement was accessible in 1975 through a service entrance used by maintenance workers, a detail that tightened a knot that had never fully loosened around the man's name. Prosecutors convened quietly, discussing whether the discovery justified new charges or whether the acquittal had drawn a line too firm to cross. The legal calculus was cold and precise, unconcerned with feeling. Double jeopardy loomed large. Without a direct link to Eleanor Weiss, the items were powerful but insufficient. The case remained officially unchanged, but unofficially, it shifted again, gaining a darker gravity. The man by the river noticed a change before anyone told him. He felt it in the way reporters resumed parking at the end of his street, in the renewed attention of neighbors who had begun, briefly, to look away. He did not comment publicly. He declined interview requests. He closed his curtains earlier in the evening. The quiet he had once cultivated now pressed on him, heavy and watchful. Detectives returned to retired detectives' notes, the fragments he had left behind beyond the famous 6 words. In old notebooks stored in the precinct archives, they found references to basements, to service corridors, to spaces that existed outside the public eye. Nothing explicit. Nothing that could stand alone. But when layered over new discovery, the fragments aligned in unsettling ways. It was as if the retired detective had been sketching a map without ever drawing the final line. They interviewed former maintenance staff from the 70s, men now in their 80s, their memories fragile but not entirely gone. One recalled a man working late, asking questions about access points, about which doors were alarmed and which were not. At the time, it had seemed like diligence, the curiosity of someone who wanted to do his job well. In retrospect, it felt different, sharpened by context. The witness could not swear to dates. The defense would have dismantled his testimony in minutes. Still, the detectives listened. The city's response was conflicted. Editorials argued that the acquittal should stand, that reopening wounds without new certainty was cruelty disguised as persistence. Others insisted the basement discovery proved the trial had been premature, that the system had blinked too soon. The phrase cold case appeared again and again, but now it was paired with words like unfinished and unresolved, the promise of closure replaced by something more honest and more unsettling. For families, the renewed attention was a double-edged thing. Some reached out to detectives with boxes of photographs and letters, artifacts they had protected for decades. Others withdrew, unwilling to relive hope that had already failed them once. Eleanor Weiss's nieces watched from a distance, their grief long since settled into something quieter, something they carried rather than confronted. They said little, but when asked, they repeated the same thing. The truth did not disappear just because a jury said not guilty. Behind the scenes, a different conversation began to take shape. One less focused on a single suspect and more on the environment that had allowed disappearances to remain invisible. Criminologists spoke about the 70s as a perfect storm, a city stretched thin, social services collapsing, police overwhelmed. Women who lived alone fell into gaps no one had the time to bridge. Predators, if they were careful, could operate without consequence. Eleanor Weiss's case became a lens, a way of examining not just one man's actions, but a system's blind spots. The man's help began to fail. Hospital visits appeared in public records, small notices that reporters seized on with intensity that bordered on indecent. Would he die before anything more could be proven? Would the city be robbed of the chance to hear something final? The questions circled, unanswered. In one rare moment of candor with a nurse, he asked whether people ever stopped asking questions once someone was gone. The nurse did not know how to answer. Detectives requested a final interview, framing it as an opportunity for clarification rather than accusation. He declined through his attorney. The refusal was his right, but it landed heavily, reinforcing the sense that whatever truth existed would not be handed over willingly. The case drifted again, not into obscurity, but into a tense holding pattern, alive but suspended. Then, quietly, another lead surfaced. A box found in a closed storage unit linked not to the man, but to the cousin whose name had once held the car registration. Inside were receipts, photographs, and a ledger that listed addresses with cryptic annotations. The cousin had died years earlier, taking explanations with him, but the ledger bridged gaps that had frustrated investigators for decades. Some addresses matched the locations of disappearances. Others were new, unexamined. The pattern widened, implicating more than one set of hands, more than one life lived in the margins. The revelation complicated everything. If the man was not alone, if the disappearances were facilitated by a loose network rather than a single actor, the acquittal took on a different shape. It was no longer about guilt or innocence in isolation, but about a structure that had allowed harm to diffuse responsibility. The legal system, designed to assign blame cleanly, struggled with the messiness of that possibility. As winter set in, the investigation slowed again, constrained by budgets, by priorities, by the reality that time had already taken most of what could be taken. The detectives involved met less frequently, but when they did, Eleanor Weiss's name still surfaced, a touchstone that anchored their efforts. They spoke about what justice meant when proof eroded, about whether naming a pattern was itself a form of accountability. The man by the river watched the water rise and fall with the seasons, his own life narrowing to appointments and routines that no longer offered comfort. He kept his television on low, the news a constant murmur. Sometimes he reached for a notebook that was no longer there, his hand paused in midair before dropping back to his side. Whatever he had once recorded, whatever he had once controlled, had slipped beyond his reach. In the end, Part 6 of the story did not deliver revelation or confession. It delivered something colder and more persistent. The understanding that some crimes do not end, they disperse, fragmenting across time and space until they become part of the landscape. Eleanor Weiss's disappearance was no longer a single point in 1975. It was a shadow that stretched forward, touching basements and courtrooms and riverbanks, reshaping the way the city remembered itself. The case remained officially unchanged, but unofficially, it had evolved into something larger than resolution, a study in how silence could be engineered and how difficult it was to dismantle once built. And as the city moved on, louder and faster, the unanswered questions stayed behind, patient and unyielding, waiting for a moment that might never come, but refusing stubbornly to disappear. Time did what it always did after the noise faded. It stretched, thinned, and rearranged the story into something quieter but no less dangerous, because the absence of answers had a way of seeping into places certainty once lived. The investigation entered a phase no press release could capture, not active enough to feel urgent, not dormant enough to feel finished, a low, steady hum beneath the city's surface. Files remained open, names remained circled, and Eleanor Weiss remained missing in a way that now felt permanent rather than temporary. Detectives rotated off the case one by one, reassigned to fresher crimes with blood still wet and witnesses still reachable. A smaller group stayed behind, bound not by obligation, but by something closer to obsession, the same pull that had once driven a young detective to write 6 words and fold them small. They revisited the ledger from the cousin's storage unit, studying its shorthand, testing theories late into the night. Some addresses led nowhere, demolished buildings, repurposed lots, spaces scrubbed clean by redevelopment. Others revealed unsettling coincidences, reported disturbances, unexplained calls, missing persons whose cases had never been connected to anything larger. One address led to a closed boarding house in the Bronx, shuttered since the early 80s. Inside, dust lay thick, undisturbed, but behind a false wall in a shared bathroom, investigators found markings scratched into the plaster, dates and initials layered over each other, a crude record of passage rather than confession. There was no way to link them definitively to any crime, but the implication lingered, suggesting a transient flow of people and secrets through spaces designed to erase identity. The detectives photographed everything, knowing even as they did that it might never matter in court. The city's memory shifted again. Without a trial to anchor discussion, the case drifted into a different category, less a legal drama than a cautionary myth. Journalism students dissected it in classrooms, debating ethics and inference. True crime podcasts adopted it, narrating the known facts and speculating on the gaps, their hosts careful to use words like allegedly, while audiences filled in the blanks on their own. Eleanor Weiss's name gained a strange afterlife, spoken by people who had never known her, who imagined her through tone and pacing rather than memory. The man by the river grew quieter still. His health deteriorated in ways that made headlines uncomfortable to write, strokes of misfortune that stripped away independence piece by piece. He sold the house, moved into assisted living, a place with beige walls and scheduled meals, a place where privacy existed only in theory. Staff members recognized him from the news, whisper when they thought he could not hear. Some were kind, some were cautious. None asked him directly about the past. In that place, stripped of routines that had once given him control, he became restless. He wandered halls at night, confused, sometimes agitated, sometimes eerily calm. On more than one occasion, he asked staff where the stairs led, insisting he needed to check something in the basement. Each time, he was gently redirected. The requests were logged, then forgotten, then remembered again when detectives reviewed the facility's incident reports months later. The detectives debated whether to interview him again, weighing the value of anything he might say against the ethical line of questioning a man whose mind was beginning to fray. They decided against it. If truth emerged now, it would be tainted, easily dismissed as confusion. The opportunity, if it had ever existed, was gone. Elsewhere, the ripple effect of the case continued in quieter forms. The NYPD revised its approach to long-term missing persons, integrating pattern analysis earlier, sharing data across precincts in ways that would have been unthinkable in 1975. Training modules referenced Eleanor Weiss's case without naming it directly, a lesson encoded in procedure rather than story. Progress arrived, but it came too late for those already lost. Families of other missing women began to contact each other, forming informal networks. Sharing fragments of information the city had never connected for them. Some believed the man by the river was responsible. Others suspected the cousin or someone else entirely. What united them was not certainty, but recognition, the sense that their losses belonged to something larger than individual tragedy. A breakthrough almost came from an unexpected direction, a construction project near the river where the man had lived. Workers uncovered shallow depression filled years earlier, soil composition inconsistent with the surrounding ground. Authorities were called. The area was excavated carefully, methodically. For 2 days, anticipation built, reporters gathering at a respectful distance. What they found was debris, old timber, rusted metal, nothing human. The disappointment was sharp and collective, a reminder of how fragile hope had become. The case absorbed the false alarm without collapsing, but it left a residue, a fatigue that settled over everyone involved. Detectives spoke less frequently, meetings shorter, conversations looping back to the same unresolved points. The ledger, the basements, the shoes by the door, the quiet exits. Each element was familiar enough to feel worn, yet none could be discarded. In assisted living, the man's world narrowed further. On one afternoon, during a routine check, a nurse found him sitting on his bed, holding a scrap of paper he had torn from a magazine. On it, he had written a list of addresses, some crossed out, others circled. The handwriting was shaky but recognizable. When asked what it was, he said it was nothing, just old places. The paper was taken, photographed, added to a growing file that felt increasingly symbolic rather than actionable. The addresses overlapped with those in the cousin's ledger. Not all. Enough. Legal experts weighed in once more, speculated about whether new charges could ever be brought, whether conspiracy could be argued now that one potential participant was dead and the other infirm. The consensus was bleak. The law was not built for this kind of erosion, this kind of delayed clarity. The system demanded moments, not decades. Eleanor Weiss's case entered a different phase of existence, less about solving and more about remembering. Memorials were held, modest and understated, attended by family members, advocates, and a few detectives who felt compelled to stand in a place where nothing had ever stood before. They spoke her name aloud, anchoring it in sound, refusing to let it dissolve into abstraction. The city, meanwhile, continued to rebuild itself, erasing old structures, smoothing over rough edges, turning basements into retail space and alleys into pedestrian paths. With each renovation, the possibility of discovery shrank and expanded at the same time, the physical past disappearing even as the narrative past gained traction. As the man's health declined further, rumors began to circulate about a deathbed confession, whispers that he might unburden himself in his final days. They proved unfounded. When he finally slipped into a coma, there were no last words, no dramatic revelations, only a medical chart filled with measurements and observations that had nothing to do with 1975. When he died, the notice was brief. Age, natural causes. No mention of Eleanor Weiss. No mention of the trial. The city marked it, then moved on. For a moment, it seemed possible that the story might finally settle, that the unanswered questions would calcify into history. But stories like this did not end cleanly. They lingered, reshaping themselves around absence, refusing to be contained by outcomes or obituaries. Eleanor Weiss remained missing, her case officially unsolved despite verdicts, despite discoveries, despite patterns that pointed but never closed. In the end, Part 7 did not bring resolution or collapse. It marked a transition, the slow realization that the truth might never arrive as a single coherent revelation, but only as fragments scattered across time, enough to disturb, enough to warn, never enough to conclude. And as the city carried on, louder than before, the quiet mechanics of disappearance remained embedded in its past, a reminder that some mysteries endured not because no one looked hard enough, but because they were built to survive being looked at. After the man's death, the story should have ended the way these stories usually did, with a final paragraph written in past tense, a closing line about unanswered questions, a quiet acceptance that whatever truth existed had gone with him. Instead, the absence he left behind behaved differently than expected. It did not collapse inward. It expanded. Files that had once felt dormant began to surface again, not because anyone demanded they be reopened, but because new eyes kept finding them, drawn by the gravity of something unresolved. The assisted living facility cleared his room within days, an efficient erasure meant to make space for the next resident. His remaining possessions fit into 2 boxes: clothes, toiletries, a radio that no longer worked properly. And beneath the false bottom of a nightstand drawer, discovered almost by accident, a thin envelope, unmarked, sealed with tape yellowed by age. Inside were photocopies, not originals, copies of documents that had once been public and then forgotten, building schematics, maintenance schedules, transit maps with routes circled in pencil. There was nothing illegal about them, nothing incriminating in isolation, but together they felt like preparation rather than coincidence. The envelope made its way back to detectives, passed hand to hand with the same care once reserved for the 6-word note. They spread the documents across a table, aligning them with a ledger, with the notebooks now reduced to ash, with the addresses that had refused to fade. The schematics revealed something subtle but important. The man had known buildings the way other people knew faces, understood where sound traveled, where cameras didn't reach, where keys were reused long after they should have been replaced. This was not evidence of a single act. It was evidence of fluency. A younger detective, one who had been a child when Eleanor Weiss disappeared, pointed out something no one had noticed before. The transit maps matched the routes Eleanor would have taken home, but not the most obvious ones. They traced alternatives, paths that avoided crowds, stairwells that emptied into alleys rather than streets, routes a person would only take if they were guiding someone, if they wanted to move without being seen. The realization landed quietly, the way all the most unsettling truths did in this case. The district attorney's office reviewed the new material and issued a brief statement acknowledging receipt, careful to promise nothing. There would be no posthumous charges, no declaration of guilt. The law remained unchanged. But internally, the tone shifted. The case was no longer treated as a question of whether the man was responsible, but how many people might have been affected by the world he navigated so easily. The city's relationship with the case evolved again, this time into something resembling collective introspection. Articles appeared that focused less on the man and more on the environment that had allowed disappearances to persist unnoticed. Writers described the 70s as a city hollowed out by crisis, where survival demanded attention and empathy was rationed. They spoke of women like Eleanor Weiss, whose lives did not register as urgent enough until they vanished. In the Lower East Side building, renovations resumed after the basement discovery, but the work was different now. Contractors moved more slowly. Walls were opened carefully. Every hidden cavity was inspected, every sealed space documented. Nothing else was found, but the act itself mattered, a quiet acknowledgement that the building's history could not simply be painted over. A memorial plaque appeared near the entrance one morning without ceremony or announcement. It did not name Eleanor Weiss alone. It listed several names, women who had lived in the neighborhood and disappeared across a span of years, their cases never solved. The plaque did not accuse. It did not explain. It simply marked absence as something worth remembering. The detectives who had stayed with the case longest began to retire themselves, handing over files thick with annotation and cautionary notes. They warned their successors not to chase closure for its own sake, not to mistake pattern for proof or proof for truth. They spoke about patience, about humility, about the danger of believing a story was finished simply because it had grown old. One of them returned to retired detective's original workspace, now long repurposed, and stood in the spot where the desk had once been. He imagined the man writing those 6 words, choosing restraint over explanation, trusting time to do what it eventually did. The note had not solved the case in the way headlines preferred, but it had prevented it from vanishing entirely. In that sense, it had succeeded. The story found new life in academic circles, criminologists and sociologists using it as a case study in disappearance without spectacle. They analyzed how routines could be weaponized, how calm could be engineered, how cities could absorb loss without noticing. Eleanor Weiss's name appeared in journals, footnotes anchoring arguments about visibility and neglect. It was not justice, but it was recognition. For Eleanor's family, the passage of time softened nothing but sharpened perspective. They stopped waiting for an answer that would arrive fully formed. Instead, they measured truth in increments in the accumulation of acknowledgement, the plaque, the changes in policy. The quiet understanding that what happened to her was not an isolated anomaly. They visited the building less often now, choosing to remember her elsewhere, in places that did not echo what might have been. Years passed. The city continued its relentless transformation, glass towers rising where tenements once stood, transit lines rerouted, neighborhoods renamed. But the case refused to be erased entirely. It lingered in training manuals, in conversations between detectives, in the way missing persons reports were handled with more care than before. Eleanor Weiss became a reference point, not a headline, a caution embedded in process rather than spectacle. Occasionally, a new tip surfaced, a letter sent anonymously, a memory shaken loose by age. Most led nowhere. Some added texture, without clarity. Each was logged, considered, placed alongside the others in a file that had grown less about solving and more about documenting. The case became an archive of absence. On an anniversary that passed without notice in the press, a small group gathered near the river where the man had once lived, not to mark him, but to confront the idea that answers sometimes flowed past without stopping. They spoke quietly about Eleanor Weiss, about the women whose names never made headlines, about how easily a city could look away. Then they left, carrying nothing with them except the weight of knowing. In the end, the case did not resolve itself into certainty. It settled into something else, a permanent tension between what could be proven and what could be understood. The retired detective's note remained in storage, its ink fading, its message intact. The ledger, the schematics, the scraps of paper, all pieces of a story that refused to align neatly, but aligned enough to disturb. Eleanor Weiss's disappearance remained officially unsolved, but it was no longer invisible. It had reshaped how the city thought about its own blind spots, how it remembered those who vanished quietly. The mystery endured, not as a failure, but as a reminder that some truths were not designed to arrive cleanly, that some stories ended not with answers, but with a deeper awareness of what had been lost. And as the city moved forward, louder and brighter than ever, the shadow of 1975 remained just beneath the surface, patient, unresolved, waiting not for closure, but for remembrance. By the time the case reached its 4th decade, it had stopped behaving like an investigation and started behaving like a fault line, invisible on the surface, but shaping everything built above it. New York had learned how to speak about Eleanor Weiss without promising an ending, how to invoke her name as a warning rather than a question, and that shift mattered more than anyone admitted out loud. Cold cases usually cooled into trivia or folklore. This one stayed warm, not hot enough to burn, but warm enough to be felt by anyone who lingered too long near it. The files were digitized, then digitized again, migrating across systems as technology marched forward, each transfer risking loss, corruption, erasure. Detectives assigned to audit old cold cases flagged Eleanor's file repeatedly, not because it was active, but because it was heavy, dense with annotations, cross-references, marginalia left by people who had once believed proximity to truth was enough. In training rooms, instructors used it to illustrate how silence could be constructed, how absence could be staged to look like choice. The lesson was never explicit. It didn't have to be. Across the city, other cases began to echo in ways that felt uncomfortably familiar. A woman vanished from Brooklyn after a late shift, her apartment found neat, her shoes by the door. Another from Harlem. Similar pattern, similar quiet. These cases unfolded under modern scrutiny, surveillance cameras, cell phone data, rapid response, and still the similarities triggered a low, collective alarm. Investigators moved quickly, aggressively, determined not to repeat history. In each instance, answers came sooner, perpetrators identified, narratives closed. And yet, each resolution threw Eleanor Weiss's absence into sharper relief, a reminder of how much context mattered, how timing could decide everything. Journalists revisited the story periodically, careful now, less declarative. They wrote about it as a study in limits, the boundaries of justice when time stripped evidence to bone. One long-form piece traced the journey of the retired detective's note, from desk drawer to courtroom to archive, describing it not as a key, but as a signal flare fired across decades. Another focused on a man by the river, not to rehabilitate or condemn, but to examine how ordinary a life could look while accommodating extraordinary harm. The comments sections filled with arguments that never resolved, readers divided between certainty and skepticism, belief and restraint. For those closest to the case, the debate felt distant. Eleanor Weiss's family had learned to live without resolution, a skill acquired painfully and without instruction. They marked anniversaries privately, lighting candles, sharing stories that preserve her as a person rather than problem. They stopped following coverage closely, trusting that whatever remained to be uncovered would surface without their vigilance. Grief, after so long, became less about waiting and more about carrying. In the precinct, a young detective stumbled upon a detail that had been overlooked not because it was hidden, but because it seemed too small to matter. In one of the transit maps recovered from the man's envelope, a station had been circled and then crossed out. The crossing out suggested a change of plan, a decision revised. That station was under renovation in the summer of 1975. Its usual exits closed, forcing passengers to use a service stairwell that led into a narrow side street. City records confirmed it. The detail didn't prove anything. It couldn't, but it tightened the story in a way that felt precise rather than speculative. The detective shared the finding in a meeting that ended with silence rather than celebration. Everyone in the room understood the implication. Everyone also understood its limits. The law had moved on. The case had moved on. The truth, whatever shape it took, no longer needed to announce itself. Outside official channels, the case continued to live its own life. A documentary series pitched the story as a meditation on memory and accountability. Consultants debated how to frame it, whether to lean into the mystery or the systemic failure. Eleanor Weiss's name was spoken in production meetings alongside words like arc and audience. The family declined participation. The project moved forward anyway, careful and restrained, adding another layer to the story sediment. Viewers responded with a mix of fascination and fatigue. Some praised the restraint, the refusal to force closure. Others complained about the lack of answers, as if the absence were a creative choice rather than a reflection of reality. The series ended not with a revelation, but with an empty frame, a shot of the lower east side street at dawn. Traffic beginning to hum, the city waking without acknowledgement of what had once happened there. The city's institutions absorbed the case in subtler ways. Grant funding shifted toward long-term missing persons units. Databases were redesigned to flag patterns earlier. Interagency cooperation improved, driven less by policy than by embarrassment, a quiet recognition that Eleanor Weiss's disappearance had exposed a blind spot no one wanted to admit existed. Progress arrived unevenly, but it arrived. Years after the basement discovery, a contractor renovating a different building several blocks away found a small compartment beneath a stairwell, sealed and forgotten. Inside were personal items similar to those found before, ordinary and devastating. This time, one object could be identified, matched to a woman reported missing in 1979. The discovery did not link directly to Eleanor Weiss, but it reinforced a larger narrative, the idea that the city had once allowed a method of disappearance to flourish unnoticed. The news cycle spiked briefly, then receded, but among investigators, the impact lingered. The ledger from the Cousins storage unit was revisited yet again, its cryptic annotations scrutinized with fresh urgency. Some addresses were now clearly irrelevant. Others remained stubbornly ambiguous. The sense grew that the ledger was less a record of crimes and more a map of opportunity, a guide to spaces where oversight thinned and anonymity thickened. It was unsettling in its mundanity, a reminder that infrastructure could be repurposed by those who understood it too well. The retired detective's legacy continued to evolve. His former colleagues spoke of him with renewed respect, his restraint reframed as wisdom rather than hesitation. He had not tried to force the truth into daylight prematurely. He had trusted time, and time, imperfect and uneven, had responded. The note became emblematic of a different approach to justice, one that acknowledged uncertainty without surrendering to it. As the years stacked up, Eleanor Weiss's case reached a strange equilibrium. It was neither open nor closed, neither active nor forgotten. It existed as a reference point, a gravity well around which other stories orbited. When new detectives encountered it, they felt its weight immediately. The accumulation of effort, the layers of inference, the quiet insistence that something important had happened and mattered still. On the 50th anniversary of her disappearance, there was no official ceremony, no press conference, just a small notice in a local paper, a few lines acknowledging the date. Someone left flowers near the building entrance overnight. By morning, they were gone, taken, or discarded, their brief presence unrecorded. The city moved on, as it always did. And yet, beneath the movement, the case endured, not as a failure of justice, but as a measure of its limits. Eleanor Weiss's absence had changed how the city thought about missing people, about quiet crimes, about the cost of looking away. The mystery remained, unresolved and unyielding, but its impact was real, woven into policy and practice, into memory and caution. In that way, the story refused to end. It did not resolve into a neat conclusion or a final truth. It persisted as a reminder that some answers arrived only partially, that some cases were solved not by naming a culprit, but by exposing a vulnerability. And as New York continued to reinvent itself, louder and faster, the echo of 1975 remained just beneath the noise, a steady undertone, asking not who did this, but how it was allowed to happen at all.